Hello everyone, this is going to be an interesting video again. We're talking about the Sphinx. And if you just look at this, if you just look at the nonsense that is written on Wikipedia, it says it was carved, cut from the bedrock. The Sphinx has been restored with layers of blocks. It is the oldest known monumental sculpture in Egypt and is commonly believed to have been built by ancient Egyptians in the Old Kingdom during the reign of the pharaoh Khufu. Now, you can see the narrative, the paradigm is starting to slip. They write it is commonly believed, and that is way too late. The paradigm is disappearing. I predict in a couple of years they are going to write it is no longer believed to have been built by the ancient Egyptians of the Old Kingdom, and it is at present unknown, though that there are various competing theories as to when it is built. I reckon within about 5 years, that is what is going to be written, because this thing about Khufu is absolute nonsense. The article actually tells us this was a theory from the mid-19th century. People speculated it was built by Khufu simply because it's near the Khufu pyramid, which is not the best reason at all. And in fact, there is the Sphinx Stela, which is somewhere in front of the Sphinx, which was made in 500 BC in the final days of independent Egypt before the Persians took them over. And that actually said that Khufu found this buried in sand, and he was before Khufu. And he actually restored it. You can see those bricks, the Old Kingdom bricks, which have restored this. Now, I've got some evidence in this video, some more evidence to show that it could not have been ancient rain which eroded the Sphinx. I have so much respect for Robert Schoch. I think he's one of the best. But I think he could be wrong here. Now, if you look at the erosion, you see fissures here. That's erosion from rain. And recently there have been articles saying the erosion is all horizontal. It's erosion from water, which is standing still, which is lapping up against the Sphinx, and it's changing height. So I'm wondering, was this built in deep antiquity? We're talking maybe, perhaps at least 10,000 years. At least 10,000 years. And it was built in a dry time. And in later times it was abandoned, and a lake surrounded this whole area. And this was taken over by a lake which flowed into the Nile. There were endless rains, and that's what eroded the structure. It was then buried in sand again. The entirety of the Egyptian history has been a dry period. Apparently the ancient rain stopped just before the Egyptian period started, possibly helping facilitate Egypt actually sprout, because the rains weren't plaguing them with disease and mosquitoes, I imagine. And this is all horizontal erosion. Nothing in Egyptian history matches this. Robert Temple I think he's got the best interpretation of this. He says there was a Sphinx lake here, but I reckon this erosion is far above the surrounding landscape. It's a little bit too high on the body. I don't buy it. He reckons there was a Sphinx lake, but the area here is much lower than that. I think it was a primordial swamp which surrounded this structure after it was carved. It was abandoned, and then it was surrounded by this swamp. Now, I've mentioned it stopped raining in Egypt. And yeah, for most of Egyptian history, it's been dry. This is the oldest dress in the world, the Tarkan dress, and it's from 50 kilometers south of the Sphinx. 50 kilometers from a tomb. And I want to ask you, why hasn't this rotted away? If there was all this rain, and this is 1,000 years older than the Sphinx is supposed to be. If there was all this rain and stuff just before Egyptian history, this should have rotted away. This is slightly older than Egypt. Where's it gone? And if the erosion happened from rain after 2,500 BC, why is this still here? And in fact, why are there millions and millions of mummified cats and bodies still around? They should have rotted as well. It doesn't matter how much you preserve them. And I know they were locked in tombs. I know that. But it doesn't matter how many preservatives you pump into them, they're going to rot. They're going to rot. Now, this is Egypt. obviously. And it rains a lot more here, closer to the Mediterranean Sea. The climate is more Mediterranean, more European. Here, the climate is desert. It's pure African climate. Here is where you have, I think the mummies would be preserved way better. But as I mentioned, that dress is found only 50 kilometers south of Cairo. It is found in Lower Egypt. Now, I know it's locked in a tomb. It was found in a tomb. Sure, it's dry in a tomb, but what about steam? Steam can still get in. Earth tremors can open up fissures in the ground and steam can get in. We're talking about a dress that is 5,500 years old. What about the mummies? What about the manuscripts that have been found? The oldest paper in the world is from Egypt. It's 3000 BC. We have papers from Khufu's era. We have papers from Khufu's era about the work he did on the pyramid. I think he restored the Sphinx. I think he changed an earlier structure into the current Khufu pyramid. What's going on? It wasn't raining at all. So all of this erosion that we see on the Sphinx, it must be from some primordial swamp. All these mummies in the desert parts of Egypt, in Upper Egypt, they're all fine. It's as if they'd been buried 100 years ago. Dry as a bone. So I ask you, what is going on? What is going on that caused the erosion on the Sphinx? And by the way, because I really love Robert Temple, he pointed out that this was carved during the time of the Middle Kingdom. It was recarved. So Khufu found it and it was recarved in this man's image, Amenemhet II. And in this era, the eyes are all done like they are done on the Sphinx. I find that extremely convincing. And yeah, I think that's why this is much newer than the rest of it, really. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much, and it's always a pleasure.